Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Robert from Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Today's topic, I wanted to talk about this idea that white people on average hate Islam more than other groups. Right? And I know these are very sensitive topics. Um, you know, uh, Many Muslims believe this. In fact, many non-Muslims believe this. Um, but I think that there's a lot more that lies underneath the surface as to why it appears that way, and also what perpetuates it, right? So I'm not, first and foremost, I'm not denying that there are many white people that do not like Islam slash Muslims, right? So Islam was the historical adversary, um, of Europeans for centuries. It was them versus the Ottoman Empire. In more recent times, we have the tragedy of 9/11, of other terrorist attacks, in the United States, Canada, and Europe, right? So, and of course, you can't mention this without talking about colonialism and neo-colonialism, the neoconservative wars in the Middle East, North Africa, and the rest of the Muslim world. So, it's and there's for many Muslims this is a huge sore spot. So to even talk about these subjects, it's very sensitive, and they'll usually you know to provide if you're not if you don't provide like counter arguments. I'm going to talk about how to address these problems without trying to minimize this charge of like racism that you might see from some Muslims when we talk about these things, because there's a lot of these arguments that they come up with, and some of them are actually true. So it's important to know just to be able to diffuse it when necessary. But even still, some people are just not going to be able to change their minds one way or the other. But as at the very least, you'll have the intellectual tools, to kind of diffuse these kind of arguments. So, you know, let's just look at things ceteris paribus, everything being equal. Do white non-Muslims hate Islam and Muslims compared to any other group, right? Um, and I think the best example of this is converts, right? When people convert to Islam, on average, what is the reaction of their family members? Because you know when we look at the arguments from the other side that some Muslims make, that all white people hate Muslims or most white people hate Muslims. The evidence that they're grabbing from is from us. It suffers from all these different biases, selection biases, attrition biases. Just to give you a simple example, um, white people who vote for conservative groups, many of them are opposed to the neoconservative wars in the Middle East. Some of them are opposed to Zionism, but there's no political party that they could vote for that will satisfy all of those. So they don't want to vote liberal, obviously, because for certain reasons they don't want the liberals in Canada. They've because of their policies, rent prices have skyrocketed here. The budget's a total mess, and their kids are being indoctrinated with political agendas that they don't agree with. Whether or not you agree with belligerent foreign policy towards Muslims or not, it doesn't matter. There's no political party you can vote for that doesn't have that. That's on at least on the right side of the spectrum. So you almost have like no choice but to vote for these parties. So some Muslims will look at that and go, this, look at the white people. They're all voting for these, like is all these, political parties, that have a belligerent foreign policy and domestic policy towards Islam. But again, that's a selection bias, but ceteris paribus, everything being equal, the best method is, people who are converting to Islam, what's the reaction of their family members, right? And on average, it would be good to statistically analyze this. But in our experience, I've been Muslim for 20 years. when white people convert to Islam, the reactions from our families range from mixed to sometimes very accepting and sometimes not accepting. But on the average, I would say, the most white converts, the reaction of their families, maybe, uh, taken back at first, but on the whole, like it ends up being that many of us, our families had no problem with it, or at least several of our family members had no problem with it. But it never gets to the point where, or very rarely gets to the point where your families actually want to kill you or severely harm you or kick you out of the house. It does happen, but not nearly to the extent of non-white converts. Like you could look at Latino converts. Many Latinos, their families are heavily Catholic, and I've seen very, very negative reaction from Latino converts vis-a-vis, their Latino family, because they're such strong Catholics. And yeah, it can get very dangerous very quickly. You can look at Arab Christians who convert to Islam. If you're an Arab Christian and you convert to Islam in the Arab world, um, your family will hunt you down and kill you. It's well known. You can talk to many Muslims about it. And the same goes for Hindus. Hindus who convert to Islam, whether in India or outside of India, the reaction of their families most of the time is absolutely horrific. And Sikhs, Sikhs are another category, and Sikhs, and even Sikhs, they have a positive relationship now with Muslims in India because they're, allied against the Modi government. But still, like a Sikh who converts to Islam usually gets a very negative reaction from their families. And Jewish converts to Islam, like I can't fathom what they go through, especially now, right? So and that's not to say that, some white converts are going to experience bad things from their families, but on the whole, I mean, there's just no comparison. Um, so that's definitely one thing. Um, and, just, like there's other arguments that you can make against this. Some Muslims will say, like, because of their experience, and let's be honest, many of these Muslims, especially Muslim women, who wear the hijab, many of them have absolutely no white family members. They don't interact with white people. They may not even have one white friend, right? Especially in large cities like Toronto, right? So, and they could be in a crowd of like, say, 100 white people, and, maybe one or two people might give them a dirty look, or one or two of them might make, a negative comment. And from that, they extrapolate, because these are white people making these remarks, that means that all these white people think this way, or most of them think this way. And it's not to take away from the negative experience they had. I'm not trying to downplay or minimize what they're going through. But it does, that's the thing. You're taking one or two people, or maybe even if let's just highball, let's say 10 people made negative comments, right? It's going to appear as though those 10 comments, those 10 commenters stand out, and the rest of the 90 just fade away. And all you can think about is the 10 people that made awful comments, right? And sometimes, when you're on the bus, and it's about minimizing, the possibility of a negative experience, as a white person. Like, you could say something, you could say, hey, don't talk to her like that. But who knows if that could draw an even bigger reaction, right? Maybe they don't, you don't want them butting into their business, right? So it's easy to look at the negative experiences that some of these Muslims have, and for them to extrapolate and say all white people think this way, right? So it's what's it's called availability heuristics in social psychology. You just take it, forget about statistics, forget about what people actually think when you pull them. It just comes down to, I had a negative experience with this particular white person, or two or three white people. Ergo, that means that most white people hate Muslims, right? There's a couple other fallacies with that. Like, you're in a majority white country, right? So by default, by sheer numbers, you're going to have more white people who hate Muslims, right? If you have a country of 10 million white people, and 10% of them don't like Muslims. That means you're going to have 1 million white people that don't like Muslims. And let's say there's a minority group, maybe they make up 50,000, or let's say 100,000 of the population, and 50% of them don't like Muslims. Obviously, you're going to have 50,000 of them that don't like Muslims, right? So you have 50,000 non-whites who don't like Muslims, and 100, and 1 million whites that don't like Muslims. So it's going to appear as though, on average, percentage-wise, that what more white people are going to hate Islam, right? So that's another thing, the sheer numbers fallacy. And also, another thing to add to this is that white people who do not hate Islam, white people who have a positive impression of Muslims, white people who are interested in Islam, we can't organize in any way, shape, or form, right? We can't form a Whites for Islam group on a university campus, for example. We're not allowed to organize for any reason. Uh, it would be illegal in Canada. However, uh, where do white people, the only time we're allowed to organize, de facto, is with these conservative groups, like Rebel Media, like the Conservative Party, People's Party of Canada, and because you have an anti-Islam stance or a pro-Zionist stance, it's kind of like this aegis, this protective factor that allows you to organize. Whereas people who don't have a problem with Islam, white people who don't have a problem with Islam, we don't even think about organizing, right? So we can, and even if we did, let's say for example we created such an organization, the CTV, CBC, like legacy media, they're never going to have these people on to talk about this, right? They're just trying to keep this narrative that white people all hate Islam and Muslims, and and adding to this, another point, and this is a huge point, is that leftist organizations in universities, in government, they need to keep pushing this narrative that it's always the white majority against non-whites, and they have this historical hatred, and they need to be, and the only way to address this is by like punishing them politically or legally, charging them with like hate crime. And there's some, like I said, I'm not going to deny this. There are white people who, they're very angry at the fact that there's unbridled immigration. They their kids can't get jobs, even like fast food restaurants. Many fast food restaurants are 100% non-white now, and they're angry about this. And this has caused rent prices to triple in Ontario. They're angry about this, and they don't know what to get angry at. And from right wing conservative groups, the path of least resistance is Islam. It's Islam. When the reality is in Canada that most people who are immigrating to Canada are not even Muslim. They're not coming from Muslim countries. They're coming from China. They're coming from India. They're coming from Romania, right? So like it's the easiest thing to do is to pin it on Islam, right? And because of this, this mindset, because it's a false reality, what happens is that Muslims start thinking the best way to address this is to ally with all these non-white groups, and this will solve all of our problems, right? So, but it's a false reality, because you're basically just replacing white people who don't like Islam with non-white people who don't like Islam, and that could be even more dangerous. Like I'll give you a perfect example. I mean, if you look at the hate crimes or crimes against Muslims going on in Toronto and the GTA, most of them are from non-whites, ex-Muslims, Arab Christians, Hindus. There's so many different Islamophobic incidences that occur, and they're not coming from white people, right? So if you look at a small city like Chatham, I mean, very rarely do you see like an Islamophobic incident, and Chatham is like 95% white. um and yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated issue. Like I'm not downplaying that, the fact that yes, there are many white people that don't like Islam. There are many white people who don't like Muslims, but there are just as many, if not more, who don't have a problem with Islam and Muslims. Um, and yeah, it's unfortunate. And Muslims, if they keep taking this approach, you're just going to keep electing. Look at major political figures now that are not white and not Muslim. Have they made any impact? Have they made any difference? Have they advocated for Muslims in any way? Have they, look at Rishi Sunak, look at Suella Braverman, um, look at Vivek Ramaswamy. Uh, what what good have these people done for Muslims whatsoever, right? So it's just never that simple that just like white people don't like Muslims, therefore we need to be completely against them, and they all hate us. It's unfortunate, it really is. And on top of that, there's no white Muslim sub community. I mean, there are many white people in the West who are converting to Islam. They're converting to Islam in droves, right? But because they're not organizing or thinking about organizing in any way, it just appears as though that the white people are just going to be the unending adversary, right? And like white people, they end up assimilating into existing Muslim communities, and to keep this narrative going, the best, you know, to, to just eliminate any possible cognitive dissonance. A lot of these Muslims will say, once you convert to Islam, you're not white anymore, right? So it's really much more complicated issue than people realize. So I'm going to talk about ways, to kind of like dispel these kind of arguments that are coming from, Muslims who are on the left. It's important first and foremost, I can't stress this enough that, like it's really important not to downplay, the negative experiences that they've had, right? Of course, like if you're a hijabi on the street and, you're getting yelled at or getting dirty look from, a non-Muslim white person, that's going to affect you. You're going to have this very visceral, anxiety-induced reaction to white people here, there, and everywhere. Especially, if you're not growing up with them, you're not interacting with them. Um, you know, and the other thing is that white people tend to drink a lot. They have dogs around the house. They listen to heavy metal music. It's not an environment for Muslims to hang out in, right? So like that's why there's just far less interaction between Muslims and white people, and just going things like going to like a bar or like any type of like a hockey game. Like these are white spaces. I mean, like Muslims don't really venture into these places unless a white convert like me. So um so getting back to how to address this. So what we're proposing in Islam for Europeans would satisfy the qualms that a lot of non-Muslim or a lot of Muslim people of color have, because they'll say things like the reason why there's so much Islamophobia in the West is because 99% of Muslims are non-white, right? That's the argument, one of the arguments that they make. Okay, well, let's assume that that's true. If that's the case, then what's the solution to that? The solution, it would be more white Muslims. How do you do that? You help us organize and collectivize into sub communities, so we can grow our numbers from the ground up. And that way, you take the racial aspect out of the argument, right? They'll also say, white converts are privileged, that, like that we have it made and everything. And, we should know our place. Well, I mean, you can take the snarkiness out of that and just say, no, look, I mean, if our responsibility is to give dawah to our people, the best way to do that is to organize, right? When you convert to Islam as a white person, hundreds of your non-white friends and your white friends and family, your community members. It's our responsibility to give dawah to them collectively, and the only way you're going to do that effectively, is if we band together and form a wolf pack. Because the rest of the Muslim community, they're not going to want to venture into white spaces. They're not going to go to the hockey game. They're not going to go to the barbecues, right? So it's up to us. And over time, we find that converts, if they follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, if they're good Muslims with good moral values, our families see that, and incrementally, their opinions of Islam get better and better. So and that's the best thing that we can do, for the Muslim community. So in theory, a lot of these Muslims who are on the left who are saying that, most Islamophobia is coming from white people, they should support Islam for Europeans. Uh, you know, yeah. So again, it's a multifaceted issue. And whenever I've polled white people on Islam, the numbers are far better than what Muslims realize. I mean, I polled the Canadian Freedom Convoy a couple of years ago. Now, the Canadian Freedom Convoy was opposed to the COVID restrictions, and they were majority white. Um, and many of them were calling them white supremacists. Uh, but I went on their Twitter feed and I very clearly asked them, white Canadians, what is your opinion of Islam, right? 20% said positive, 37% said neutral, 14% said slightly negative, and 29% said highly negative. So 57% of the Canadian Freedom Convoy of white Canadians had either a neutral or positive image of Islam, right? So that's more than half, right? And this is a group that not even is representative of the whole white Canadian population. And there you go. They still, have on the whole, either don't care about Islam or Muslims or have a positive image of it. Right. So, yeah, I mean, there's many avenues I could talk about that, I could keep going, I could go on and on about this. But in general, I'll say that, you know, when addressing these topics, if you're, a member of Islam for Europeans, we want to be we want to care about optics. We don't want to downplay the negative experiences that, like our Muslim sisters have had vis-a-vis white people in the Anglosphere. It's only to point out that, there's a wide range of attitudes on Islam, among white people. It's just that, because of the certain political agendas, and the fact that the media won't give us a voice, that it makes it appear worse than it actually is. When in reality, if you look at the polling, especially when it comes to the to the war in Gaza, white I think I saw one statistic: white Americans, um, age 18 to 25, had the highest support for Palestine among any racial group. Um, so that's, it just shows you it's not the fact that they're white; it's because that, the media propaganda is, aimed towards them. So if you provide an outlet to provide an alternative voice, that then you find that the opinions on Islam and Muslims in the West improve greatly. And as a final statistic, you can always point to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The 2003 invasion of Iraq, most white Americans supported it at the time, right? In 2003, most white Canadians were opposed to it. I mean, I think it was like 70% of Canadians were opposed to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And Canada in 2003, up until now, is a whiter country than the United States. I think Canada was like 85, 90% white in 2003, and they were completely opposed to the invasion of Iraq, as opposed to Americans who were like 70, 75% white, who were supporting the war in Iraq. So it doesn't have to do with the fact that they're white. It's the fact that, the media is presenting a different side of the story, and our government was opposed to it. The Canadian government, every single political party except for the Canadian Alliance / the Conservative Party, were against the invasion of Iraq. So may Allah, help guide our fellow people to Islam, and may Allah guide them to see the truth. May Allah, soften their hearts, and may Allah protect the Muslims living in the West and abroad. I say these things because I care. I want the image of Islam in the West to improve. I'm not saying these things just to further anger or demonize or downplay Muslim women and their negative experiences that they've had with other white people. I just if we keep allying with the left, vis-a-vis these issues, it's just going to make things worse, and the opinion is changing, it's 2024, and the opinions of Islam in the West have gone more positive throughout the years. So, yeah. So in conclusion, yes, there's always going to be white people who don't like Muslims and Islam, but it's not any greater. In fact, it's probably even better than other non-white, non-Muslim groups in the Anglosphere. And on a final note, they're just more brazen. Like non-white, non-Muslim groups, um, they're more likely to commit Islamophobic incidents because there's no backlash. It's far less likely that they're going to be called racist. It's far less likely that they're going to get fired from their job. There's far fewer consequences. If you're a white person who, gets mad at a Muslim or something like that, there could be, you could be charged with a hate crime, you know. But a lot of these recent non-white, non-Muslims who don't like Islam, who've come to Toronto recently, they just they're not bound by these types of by these types of laws. Um, so that's my time for the day. Let me know what you think in the chat. This is Rob for Islam for Europeans. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.